Orm's directions dutifully without any protest, standing where indicated and adjusting her posture according to Orm's wishes. Orm moved slightly to the right, making sure the two were well framed. Orm pressed the camera button, and a click sound was heard several times, signaling that every moment was captured. The result was several loving photos, some showing them looking at each other affectionately, others showing their happy faces as Ling hugged Orm from behind, all set against the beautiful backdrop of the Hazu River glistening in the sunlight. After cycling for a while, they arrived at the cherry blossom garden. Pink and white cherry blossom petals filled the air, like a rain of flowers falling slowly. Orm stopped his bike, staring in amazement at the towering trees, forming a beautiful canopy above. Ling walked over, put her bike to the side, and stood next to Orm, who was still mesmerized. She grabbed her camera from her bag and carefully captured Orm's cheerful smile amongst the cherry blossom petals. Every time Orm smiled, Ling felt her heart grow warmer, feeling how much that moment meant to both of them. Under the shade of the sakura trees whose flowers were gently falling in the wind, Ling and Orm posed again, smiling happily for the camera. After taking several photos, Orm felt tired and decided to sit down on one of the park benches available. Feeling the breeze caressing his face, carrying the soothing scent of cherry blossoms, Ling saw Orm sit down and without hesitation followed him. He took his place beside Orm, noticing that his face looked a little tired but still bright. Ling smiled warmly, tilting her head slightly as she asked in a soft tone, "Would you like me to buy you a drink?" Orm nodded slowly, then smiled as he looked at Ling. "Yes, I'd like to get some ice cream. It's refreshing in this weather," he replied lightly. His eyes lit up at the thought of the cold ice cream that would refresh his throat on this fairly warm day. Ling smiled and attentively smoothed Orm's hair, which was a little messy due to the wind. "Then wait here for a while. I'll buy you some ice cream over there," Ling said, pointing towards the ice cream vendor not too far from where they were sitting. Orm nodded, thanked her with a sweet smile, and leaned back against the park bench, enjoying the beautiful scenery around him. Cherry blossom petals were falling softly, decorating the air and creating a calm and romantic atmosphere. Shortly after, Ling returned with 2 ice creams in hand. She sat next to Orm, handing him one with a small smile on her face. "This is for my wife," she said as she handed over the ice cream. Orm accepted the ice cream happily, immediately scooping up a mouthful. The cold and sweet sensation of the ice cream immediately spread on his tongue, bringing a coolness that instantly refreshed his body. He smiled contentedly, looking at Ling with sincere gratitude. Ling took a bite of the cold and sweet ice cream, then turned to Orm with a small smile. There was a hint of playfulness in her smile. As her eyes fell on Orm's slightly smudged lips. "You're such a child. Eating ice cream is such a mess," she said teasingly. Orm looked up, a confused look on his face. "Huh, what? Where?" He quickly wiped his lips with the palm of his hand. "Still a mess, Fi?" he asked in a worried tone, fearing there was a stain he had missed cleaning. Ling smiled wider, stifling a small giggle. "Yes, still a mess," she replied quickly. "Let me help you clean it up, baby," she added, and without waiting for Orm's approval, Ling brought her face closer until there was only a thin space between them. "Peeling," Orm gasped, his eyes widening as he felt Ling's tongue touch and gently lick his lips. "It's in a public place. Don't do things like that." he whispered worriedly, though not entirely able to hide the blush on his face. Instead, Ling looked at her with a reassuring gaze. "Why not? I do it with my wife. Is there something wrong?" he asked as he looked deeply into Orm's eyes, his smile turning into a serious, loving gaze. Orm blushed, but he couldn't help the small smile on his face. "It's not that you can't, baby," he replied softly in a gentle tone. "It's just that I'm embarrassed to do that in public. You're a celebrity," he continued with an embarrassed blink. However, Ling shook her head. "I don't care," she said firmly, putting her ice cream on the bench next to her, and then cupped Orm's cheeks gently, bringing their faces closer once more. "I want everyone to know how much I love you," he said firmly, then kissed Orm's lips slowly but tastefully. Orm laughed softly, his hands reflexively holding Ling's body that continued to kiss his lips relentlessly. "Peeling, that's enough," he said softly, feeling fond but embarrassed. However, Ling didn't stop. Instead, he tightened his embrace even more, giving him one last, slightly longer peck. Finally, Ling stopped the pecking and looked at Orm with a satisfied expression. Chuckling, she gave Orm a sweet peck on the cheek and then lightly bit his cheek in amusement. "I love you so much that I want to die," Ling whispered in a soft but serious tone, her eyes filled with love. Orm was silent for a moment, moved by Ling's words. He grasped Ling's hand tightly, then said softly, Ling's hand tightly, then said softly, "Peeling, don't talk like that. If I dies, what should I do? Who will I be with?" he asked, his voice turning slightly wistful and his lips slowly pursed. Ling smiled and immediately pulled Orm's body into his arms, holding him tightly. He kissed Orm's cheek again and stroked his hair gently. "Fi won't die or leave you alone. Fi will always be here with you until death itself separates us," Ling said with conviction. Orm nodded, letting himself sink into the warmth of Ling's embrace. His head rested on Ling's chest, listening to the calm and steady beat of his heart, as if to echo the promise he had just made. The wind blew softly, swaying the branches of the sakura tree above them, making the petals fall like a gentle rain of flowers. They sat together under the cherry blossom tree, in the middle of the serene garden, as if time had stopped for a moment, leaving only the happiness and peace they felt together. Orm closed his eyes, feeling an overwhelming peace in Ling's arms, knowing that his love was anchored in the right person. After a long journey on their last day in Japan, Ling and Orm finally arrived at the villa where they were staying. It was late at night, but the atmosphere of the villa was warm and calm. The two entered the house together, with tired but happy smiles painted on their faces. After putting on their shoes and jackets, they went straight to the kitchen to tidy up the groceries they had brought. Ling placed the shopping bags on the kitchen table and turned to Orm. "I'll organize this first. You go to your room first. Get some rest." Orm smiled and nodded. "Okay, but I also want to organize our things in the suitcase, because we have to leave tomorrow." He carried the small bags of souvenirs to the room, planning to organize them neatly in the suitcase. Inside the room, Orm began to open his suitcase, sorting their belongings one by one. In between the folds of clothes, he placed the gifts for family and friends that he had prepared, carefully arranging each item, making sure everything was safe and organized. He also opened Ling's suitcase, which turned out to be simpler and less full. Ling hadn't brought much, which made it easier for Orm to tidy up without much hassle. Soon, the door to the room opened, and Ling entered, standing by the door, looking at Orm, who was still busy organizing the suitcases. "Can I help you?" she asked gently. Orm looked away briefly and smiled. "No, Fi, I'm almost done," he replied, without stopping his activity. Ling just nodded. He walked to the edge of the bed and sat down, opening his phone to check the photos they had taken throughout the day. A small smile appeared on her face as she looked at the memories. Each photo seemed to bring back a moment of their joy and laughter. After finishing closing the suitcase, Orm stretched his slightly sore body, then approached Ling and sat beside her. Ling, who was looking at photos on her phone, turned around and showed Orm one of the photos. "Look at this photo," he said, showing a photo of the two of them under a cherry blossom tree. "I want to print this photo, put it in a frame, and display it in our house." Orm looked at the photo with a smile and nodded slowly. "I agree, it's a beautiful photo." "Oh, I want to print this one too," he said as he showed another photo on his phone. Ling chuckled. "Alright, let's print all these photos. Let's make them memories that we can look at every day." She took her phone back from Orm's hand and continued looking at the other photos, smiling unconsciously. From the side, Orm looked at Ling's bright, happy face. Without thinking, he placed his hand on Ling's thigh, feeling the warmth between them. "Thank you, dear, for making me happy," he said in a soft voice. Ling turned her head, looked at Orm with an equally warm smile, and placed her hand on top of his. "There's no need to thank me. I'm happy to see you happy, and I'll keep trying to make you happy beyond this." Orm looked up at Ling with a meaningful gaze, his lips twisting into a smile that he couldn't hide. "Since you've made me happy, this time, I want to make you happy too," he whispered as he stood up slowly from his seat. He began to open the dress he was wearing, letting Ling be mesmerized by the beauty of his body. Ling swallowed, his eyes glued to Orm's figure, who was now only wearing underwear. Standing gracefully in front of him, Ling's heart was beating fast, as if she couldn't bear the intensity of their gaze. As Orm slowly stepped closer and sat on her lap, Ling could feel the warmth wrapped around their bodies. Unconsciously, her hands wrapped around Orm's waist, pulling him closer. Orm lifted his hand, his fingers moving gently, touching Ling's nape and stroking it slowly, creating a sensation that was stinging yet passionate. His voice sounded seductive, filled with a confidence that made Ling even more lost. "Tonight, peeling can do anything to me," Orm whispered in a seductive tone of voice. Ling gulped once more, a little taken aback by Orm's boldness. "Anything?" he asked slowly, his eyes gazing deeply into Orm's face, trying to read what lay behind that calm yet smoldering gaze. Ling's hands moved naturally, running over Orm's smooth back, feeling the warmth of his skin with each touch. Orm nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on Ling with a gentle yet trusting gaze. "Yes, anything," he whispered lowly, his voice almost sounding like a subtle sigh. Without answering, Ling kissed Orm passionately on the lips. He crushed his upper lip and then sucked on Orm's lower lip, while Orm reciprocated and matched the kiss while unbuttoning the shirt Ling was wearing and then tossing it to the floor. The kiss was so passionate and lustful that Orm broke the kiss and caught his ragged breath. Orm started again to give Ling's ear a peck and a small nibble, his lips moving down to kiss every part of Ling's neck, making a mark on the neck and licking it gently. The touch of Orm's lips and tongue on his neck made Ling's body react by raising his head to let Orm explore his neck. Orm's hands gently pushed Ling's body to the bed. He stayed on top of Ling's body and gave more kisses to Ling's stomach, stroking Ling's stomach muscles using his fingers in sensual movements. Orm MHH? Ling spoke in a low voice, his hands squeezing Orm's hair and quickly restraining Orm's hands that wanted to open his pants. Orm looked at Ling's face with a smile. Now let me do the work. Peeling can just enjoy it, he said calmly and went back to kissing Ling's lips with his hands, moving to undo Ling's pants. Ling returned the kiss and allowed Orm to take off his pants. Ling squirmed slightly when she felt Orm's lips kissing her Miss V. MHH. Ling let out a soft sigh. Orm looked at Ling briefly, then continued his activities by sticking out his tongue to lick Ling's sensitive area. His tongue moved quite swiftly, making Ling's body squirm, even pinning Orm's head between her thighs. MHA. Ling's hands grabbed Orm's hair lightly as he lifted his hips, slightly feeling a sensation flowing through his body as he reached his climax. Ling let out a long sigh as she reached her climax. Orm smiled with satisfaction as the liquid drenched his mouth and pulled his head away from Ling's crotch. Ling took a deep breath, catching his ragged breath as he looked up at Orm, who was crawling back up his body. Orm briefly kissed Ling's lips while rubbing her cheek. Now I'm going to give Peeling some dessert, he said in a seductive voice. Ling stood still as she watched Orm stand up and remove his underwear in front of her, especially when she saw Orm start squatting in front of her face. Orm MH? Ling's mouth fell shut when Orm occupied her mouth. Already understanding what Orm wanted, Ling began to stick her tongue out to lick Orm's Miss V from the bottom all the way to her clitoris. Orm gripped the headboard of the bed as he writhed slowly. Her hips moved back and forth, rubbing her sensitive area on Ling's mouth and further pressed her Miss V against Ling's mouth as Ling's tongue entered her sensitive area. Orm's sighs grew louder and louder, filling their room. The air-conditioned room was no match for the hot passion Orm's body felt as Ling's tongue played more and more brutally inside his vulva. Orm's body shook violently. He pressed his legs together as if he was holding back something that was about to come out of his vagina. He sighed. His long sighs could not be held back when he reached his climax point because of Ling's tongue that continued to pierce his Miss V. After the climax was reached, Orm slowly lowered his body, sliding off Ling's body and laying down beside her with his breath still out of breath. He adjusted the rhythm of his breathing, letting the sweet exhaustion fill his body, while his gaze drifted for a moment towards the sky, which seemed to be getting quieter. Ling, still feeling the euphoria, tilted her body to look at Orm beside her. A seductive smile played on her lips. Now we're 1-1, Ling murmured, raising her eyebrows as she caught Orm's attention. Do you want to continue for another round? Orm turned to Ling with a thin smile full of firmness. No further rounds, he replied quickly, immediately shutting down Ling's offer. Ling furrowed her brows, looking slightly disappointed but still curious. Why are you tired? She asked, looking at Orm curiously. Orm shook his head slowly. It's not a matter of being tired or not, he replied calmly. It's just that if we keep going, we might end up sleeping when the sun comes up. We have to go back to Thailand tomorrow morning. Phi, Orm explained in a gentle yet firm tone. Ling still hadn't given up. She took a deep breath, then tried to make another offer. How about one more round? I promise it won't be until morning this time, Ling persuaded, this time in a quieter but hopeful voice. Or we can delay our departure if we wake up late. Orm gave Ling a serious look, raising his eyebrows slightly to emphasize his answer. No, he refused firmly, without the slightest hesitation in his voice. It's better we get some sleep and rest now. Seeing Orm's serious expression, Ling couldn't help but smile slightly, her nerves a little frayed at Orm's firmness. All right, then, let's get some sleep, she replied resignedly, relenting slightly. Orm shifted his body closer until his body was completely pressed against Ling. The intimacy felt so comfortable, as if there was no space left between them. Ling smiled softly, looking at Orm, who was now calmly in his arms. Without hesitation, Ling reached for the blanket at his feet and pulled it up slowly, enveloping them both in a hugging warmth, making sure that Orm was comfortable in his arms. Ling gazed lovingly at Orm, watching every second change of expression on his sleeping face. Her heart felt warm, as if all her tiredness and burdens disappeared just by looking at Orm beside her. She closed her eyes, following the rhythm of Orm's soothing breaths, letting the warmth and tranquility carry her into dreamland.